This presentation is discussing my media education and digital literacy internship at Bay Path University, and I pursued this internship in the summer of 2019. So in internship context, I was working under the Division of Research and Academic Resources, specifically under the Hatch Learning Commons and Digital Services. I was interning for Chris Gaudreau, who is an instructional designer at Bay Path, and I had created this internship called Media Education and Digital Literacy with the purpose to expose myself to different educational technology tools and platforms. I wanted to strategize how to implement digital literacy, which I was interested in, into curriculum, and then actually get the experience of taking that curriculum and applying it into a real-world classroom experience, which I had the opportunity to do. So I want to start off the presentation with an anecdote. Chris was talking with me one day and he was saying that technology obviously should not be a crutch for teaching. It should not replace teaching. Rather, it should be used to enhance the educational experience for instructors. So I want to center this presentation around the question of how can educational technology be used to enhance the educational experience? This is a very broad question. I'm just going to be talking about my internship and the personal takeaways I had based on this question. And I came up with the realization that educational technology can be used strategically to create a landscape of digital literacy, transferable media tech skills, and inclusive learning. There are so many more topics to discuss around this frame, but these are the points I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. So an overview of the presentation, I'll be talking about 2 projects that I worked on this summer, and then also what did I learn from this experience, what can I further contribute, and then the applications going forwards, how does this intern experience affect my future academic goals and projects. And if you have any questions based on what I'm going to discuss, you can always contact me via my contact information, which is included on my website. So the first project that I want to discuss was an H5P interactive video project. This project was a collaborative one. I had worked with various Hatch Learning Commons staff as well as a biochemistry professor, Dr. Rivera Colon. What she actually did is she filmed a scientific lab methods video teaching her students how to create a color rainbow of different solutions using micropipettes, and the purpose was to teach her students different measuring tools using micropipettes. What we did is we took that video, we add an interactive layer, and how did we do that? We used the platform H5P. H5P is a platform that allows you to take HTML5 content and upload a video that you've created or you pulled from somewhere and add adaptive features and interactive features such as pop-ups, multiple choice questions, fill in the blanks, etc. So I'm going to show a video of what we had done. This is a video that we had added the interactive layer onto hers. So I'm not going to go through the whole video, but I will play some of it just to show you the adaptive features.
Today I'm going to be showing you how to use a pipette properly, because you may think you know how to use a pipette, but there are rules that you're supposed to be following.
So if we pause the video right here, we see a link out on how to use a micropipette. So if a student was watching this video, they click on the video, they'll see more information further about what was mentioned in the video. They can read up for instance here on how to use a pipette. That's just one example of an adaptive feature that H5P allows. So go back into full screen view.
In this lab, we have at least 3 different types of pipettes. Each one has a different volume. So right here, even though you might see that they all look like they're in 100, they're definitely different volumes. So for the first one, it's what is called a P10, which means that the highest volume that it can do is 10 microliters. This one is a P200, which again, it means that the highest volume is 200 microliters. And then you have the P1000, which the highest volume it can measure is 1000 microliters.
And then here we have an example of a pop-up quiz popping up. Which micropipette would you use to deliver a 15 milliliter volume? And let's say the student says P200. In that case, oh, it's correct. They can continue on with the video. You see at the bottom taskbar here,
so here, like we were talking about,
that there are different dots signifying the different features, the timeline of features that were embedded into the video that we created using H5P. If we scroll ahead, I won't go through the whole video, we can see different features.
And you can definitely see how this is a lot more volume than you saw
such
before.
as pop-ups,
so even though each one of the pipettes
comments,
looks like it's marking 100, each one of the volumes is completely different based on the type of pipette you're using.
And if we scroll ahead and click on this open circle here, it'll give you another question. In this case, I had put in a true or false question. So true or false, blue tips go with the P1000. Let's say I say false. I can check my answer. I get it wrong. What I had included in this video was an adaptive feature in that if a student gets it wrong, the video will take you back to the part where the answer was mentioned, so the student can re-familiarize themselves with content that they apparently didn't catch on to. So it'll take you back, click review content, it will go back to the part of the video where she mentions the content. Alright, so just to show another feature, and students at the bottom can see which questions they've already answered when the circle closes. If we go to another interactive feature, this one is a fill-in-the-blank one, so if I type in volume and micropipette, based on what I learned in the video, that's correct, a student can continue onwards. This is an example of the H5P video. Now, the point of this video, where is this project going to lead beyond this kind of prototype video that we had made with Professor Rivera Colon? Well, the point was to see if maybe was to show this video as a demonstration at the Festival for Teaching and Learning, which is a demonstration at the first week of BAPATH where faculty can introduce new project ideas, etc. Professor Rivera Colon was going to showcase this video to other faculty and say, this is what your students can actually create themselves. They can film their own lab methods videos, and they can, if, for example, BAPATH had the licenses to allow students to use H5P, we can have them add their own interactive layers onto this. And if we look at the benefits of that, what such a project would do, it would allow students to gain skills in information literacy, finding credible, relevant, and appropriate sources to include in their project. It would save lab time, give them technical production skills, and build on digital citizenship. So the technical production skills would be, they'd have to actually do the process of filming the video and creative production, the digital citizenship of thinking about themselves as authors of instructional content that is displayed through the video interface. And what I was really interested in was the faculty benefits. One was that, as I mentioned, it saves more lab time. For instance, if an instructor gives these videos that students have created to future students, they can say, watch this video and learn about the lab process methods, come into class, and whatever you had struggles on based on, quiz questions that you had maybe gone wrong or were understanding, come to class with them and then we'll discuss them and then we can start right into the lab rather than taking up a lot of time teaching the lab methods, which was a concern that Professor Rivera Colon had mentioned. So this is addressing giving the opportunity for faculty to have more lab time, for example, if H5P, such a project was used in a science class. It encourages students to reinforce their learning content because if they are making their own instructional videos, they have to be hyper aware of the knowledge themselves. It creates an archive of instructional resources. If a different student, say, different students each presented on a different lab method, you would compile these instructional videos in this archive video journal almost. What I was also interested in was the digital literacy integration into curriculum aspect. Oftentimes, faculty might be resistant to teach content and literacy and digital literacy skills into their curriculum. They always feel like they're competing. Sometimes they think there's not enough time in the semester because they need to get to the content, but they also are struggling to incorporate technology-based projects. Yet they want to sometimes. So such a project actually shows that you can include projects around digital literacy and informational literacy into your curriculum. And this way students are learning the content and they're also gaining skills with such literacy competencies. The thing is that not only do students develop strategic skills on these different literacies, and they also have this self-reflexive learning going on, but the actual accomplishment of the learning outcomes is achieved through the process of the H5P video, interactive video project filled with these digital literacy skills, and that's the key here. Now, this is a LibGuide, which stands for Library Guide at BayPath, that I had created. So this is a library guide. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this is a resource for students who might be making their own interactive videos. So here the first page describes about H5P, what it is, so they can get familiar with the actual software. And then creating video presentations. This is a resource for them on different videos on what makes an effective instructional video on the right hand side, different tools they might use for creating their videos, and more resources on the left. I have a page on digital literacy resources. Why is digital literacy so important? More resources on that, and then also including the global frameworks from DQ on areas of digital literacy competencies, so they could think more about digital identity, digital rights, and digital use, etc. And then I have a tab here on Creative Commons. So if a student, for example, created a video and they decided that they wanted to share it beyond their classroom, how they could appropriately do that and author their own content. Here, Peter Brunette, who works at Hatch, he's the executive director of the Hatch Learning Commons, created this tab on information literacy, why it's important. Now, if you were a BayPath student, you would see on the right here a pop-up for Credo Instruct, which is a program that BayPath has purchased a license for, and it allows you to go through course modules and video tutorials on information literacy. So if I was logged in here and a BayPath student, then I'd be able to access that. Now again, this project includes the digital literacy skills of building digital identity within students, build a wholesome online identity if their projects were going to be, shared beyond their classroom. Also thinking about digital rights, attributing information and content creation itself. For example, if they were including pop-ups like the micropipette link out I had demonstrated, and then digital communication. How are they going to collaborate with faculty on creating these videos? Think about open pedagogy, faculty and students both part of the creation of instructional material. These videos could get hosted as an open educational resource, free to anyone who wants them. Of course, BayPath would have to think about the licensing for that, but perhaps these videos could be accessed, without code, be BayPath produced, and provide that open pedagogy model. I'm thinking this project kind of relates to the production of JOVE, J-O-V-E, which is a peer-reviewed scientific video journal. Here, students are compiling their own archive of videos, for example, in this hypothetical initiative that might launch. But instead, the key is that it's not something that you have to subscribe to, and you can collaborate across different networks, whether that's different classrooms, different departments, etc., who might be using the H5P interactive tool. Now this leads into another aspect called digital badging that I was introduced to into my internship. A digital badge signifies an achievement or skill that can be displayed through online credential. It's a digital icon embedded with information, so think of it as a way of showing your competencies in an area through tangible, concrete credentials. This is really useful for employers to see that you're accountable for specific credentials they may be looking for. BayPath has various digital badges for students. One of them is the Technologically Resourceful Badge, which Peter Testori, the Dean of Learning Resources and Academic Support Services, created. So I won't go through this whole badge, but this is an example. I'm going to use the H5P video project as an example of how it can be applied and set a student up to go for such a badge. So just applying the H5P interactive video project, if students were going to be able to engage with that, is under functional skills, possessing the ability to find and select information, right? That certainly covers that. It certainly covers proving experience with digital content creation. Under creative and critical thinking, it proves being able to create a project that contains interactive or engaging elements. Well, that's all of what H5P interactive video is about. Under digital citizenship, student has a cultural and social understanding of the implications of technology. What does it mean for students to be producers of their own instructional creative content using technology to curate their own video lab methods of instructions? And what does it mean that instruction is done through such an interface, some of the instruction? Under collaboration and communication, student demonstrates effective delivery of relevant content over digital channels, right? So if these videos become part of an OER, for example, beyond the direct classroom. Okay, now listen, so the badge gets more intricate than this. I know that there are a lot of words here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but just shows that students can go after a ruby, silver, or gold badge depending on the level of competencies that they want to prove. So this is opportunity where the project can extend beyond the classroom and set them up for showing how they can have concrete skills in different areas of digital agility, let's call it, and they can take these skills and use them in a transferable way, add them to their e-portfolio, which is a form in itself of creating digital citizenship, and that's something that employers are going to be looking for anyway. Now the next project that I want to talk about is what I call the ALLI project. ALLI stands for Academic Learners and Leaders Initiative. So what it is it's a 3-week summer orientation for a group of 12 incoming students who get in. What it is it bridges the gap between high school and college, giving students more support in their academic coursework so they can better prepare for when they come into BayPath. It allows them to build relationships between faculty and staff, enrichment activities. What I was part of with the ALLI program was something called the Digital Experience Project. So I had the opportunity of building the curriculum and collaborated with Shannon Compton, the Emerging Technologies Associate here, on implementing that curriculum into the classroom. So when Dr. Compton and I were thinking about a project for the students, we wanted to think about allowing them to engage with the learning outcomes of multimedia content use, effective digital storytelling, and transferable digital education skills. We were thinking about many incoming students produce their own content every day. We take selfies, Snapchat stories, voice memos, etc. So let's use that media and have them create a day in their summer life narrative through digital storytelling. So we create a project using the platform NightLab Timeline JS, which allows students to create their own interactive timelines filled with media content, including images, video, sound recording, text, and more features, which I'll show you. So this is an example of a student's timeline. Her name is Samantha. She gave me permission to showcase this timeline for my presentation. And she titled it Day in This Life on August 23rd, 2019. And it's an interactive timeline, so you can scroll through it and look at her different slides she's inputted. At the bottom, you can glance at the different medias of text, video, eventually, image. So school supply shopping, for example. While on an overly long trip to Target, I snapped a picture with my family to have a lasting memory for when I move away. What I love about this project is it uses the images, for example, that students are already taking and calls them to create a sophisticated project about what's important and personal to them. So here we go. She uploaded this video onto YouTube and included it in her timeline of her drive home. My drive home, passing the places around my neighborhood and laughing with my mom and sister.
Has to be silent?
I don't know. It's because honestly you're taking a video. You can stop.
So there's an example. Okay. There's an example of a video that she's imported in there. Heading out. I won't go through all of them. Happy birthday. Okay, here's one other one I love. Students were able to import their own audio after we had taught them how to host them on SoundCloud. So this is the Panera Hustle and Bustle, the sound of the dishwasher, conversation, the AC working as hard as possible, slamming random dishes. This is the sound of everyone working around each other during a rush.
Does he want me to count my draw? Do you guys have any apples to add to this bucket?
Right. So as I said, what I love about this project is it allows students to include content that they already are taking of what's important and personal to them. I think there's a difference, as we know, between how we communicate in formal academic discourse and on social media sometimes. There's a time and place for both those different discourses. This project encourages students to use their digital narrative voices, such as, the language they choose to use, the shots that they choose to capture, how do they organize their moments into an overall narrative that, in part, already exists, and create a sophisticated project of hosting all the content into a story that shows off their multimedia agility for narrative purposes. At the bottom, you'll see the timeline intervals. She had to decide how she wanted to segment each slide, what time labels she wanted to mark on them. So I want to show you this example of the behind the scenes of how such a timeline was created. This is a timeline that was shared with me, and she gave me permission by a student named Elizabeth. What students have to do to create their timeline is they have to import all the information almost into a storyboarding spreadsheet. In this case, Google Sheets was used. And you see in the red columns here, they have to choose the year, month, date, time markings that they want for their timeline. So how do they want to structure and organize the sequence of medias? The headlines are what each slide title are, the text that they want to include. Here in the media section, they have to include the links of where their media is hosted, which means they have to spend go through the complex process of figuring out how to import and store, host, and distribute their media content through different platforms, such as audio, video, image, and text. So this is kind of an overview. I won't go through all of it, of all the planning that she did in order to create the timeline. In order for Timeline Night Lab to create it, it has to be put into a spreadsheet, which then is able to be rendered through the platform. So this is a good experience for students to not only storyboard and plan their timeline strategically, but now they're familiar with another application, in this case Google Sheets, and see how it can be used for organizational and project management purposes. As for the discussion of the curriculum planning that went behind this, in week 1, I had designed the curriculum so that students would acquires technical skills of Google Drive application, such as learning how to manage and store media content, importing, storing, and organizing their captured content into Google Drive, and then strategize the planning of the content for the Night Lab timeline, as I showed with the Google Sheets. Week 2 was designed for students to think about the implications of digital narrative between creator and audience. So learn how to incorporate communicative and engaging elements. Consider how different medias have different narrative impacts. Now I just want to show you this worksheet that I created. I'm not going to go over the whole thing. It was on critical and creative digital storytelling decision guidelines for the students to help them think about how to optimize the potential of each medium to articulate the narrative that they want to present. So this activity was meant to develop critical thinking about their own media presentation choices, understand that each medium has different narrative implications. So questions that they could ask themselves. Down here, there's just an area to think about: what narrative are you choosing? What media are you choosing to represent and convey that moment? And then your rationale for why you're choosing that media. If you have a moment, would a video convey it the way that you're intending to, better than an image, and why? So they can be critical about the media they're choosing, not just including various medias just to include it for and call it a multimedia presentation, but really be conscious about how different medias have different narrative impacts. Week 2 also had built in the understanding of digital responsibility, so students would learn how to appropriately include outside content sources that timeline would allow from other artists if they want. So this was good in exposing students to think about the conversation between their work and, for example, other artists' work that they might want to pull into their timelines, and then cite where they're pulling their content from. So it was a good exercise on copyright and attribution. I just want to mention that. So the different platforms that timeline allowed were Google Photos for hosting photos, SoundCloud for audio, and YouTube for videos, but they could also include Flickr, Vimeo, and Google Maps as add-ons to their timelines. So those were the different opportunities. In week 3, the curriculum gave them experience with peer reviewing. They had an activity to refine their digital narrative projects, and then also learn digital etiquette and presence by taking ownership over the distribution and maintenance of their projects through sharing, hosting, and privacy decisions. And then discover how to implement the learned technical, creative, and critical skills acquired through their DEP for future educational purposes. And then such an example is a project that they could also add to their e-portfolio, and if they wanted, they could go after another technologically resourceful badge path. Now I just want to reflect on my classroom experiences because I might have this curriculum built, but when I get into the classroom it's going to be a whole different experience than I planned. That's true for all teaching. One takeaway that I learned was obviously to live in the truth of the moment. I might have my step-by-step guide on how to teach students how to take content and import it over from their personal devices to their iPads. Every student at BayPath is given an iPad as a learning technology device, but other students might have better ideas, so gauge the energy in the room and figure out what is best for the students in the moment, and then that leads into my discovery of allowing students to solve problems in personalized approaches. So, for instance, I had decided I was going to have all the students import their content over iCloud if they had Apple accounts and sync it there into their iPads, but some students had decided that AirDrop was an easier option for them and faster. That was something I was exposed to, a strategy that I had not included in my lesson plan. They're always teaching me things, and sometimes their methods work better because they're personalized to have what they're comfortable with. So allowing for that in the classroom. Also giving students choice. So, for instance, we didn't tell the students you have to have X amount of images, X amount of videos, X amount of audio recordings to make sure you hit each platform. Of course, encourage that, but allow students to make the decision of what medias are going to be appropriate for my presentation. And this gets them into selecting specific medias and being, again, critical about their decisions in the presentation. And then also privacy and hosting, for example, is another example of giving students choice. If a student doesn't want to publicly display their, personal videos in the timeline, how can we adapt the assignment to fit their preferences and concerns over privacy? Well, they might pull, for example, video content from Vimeo, for instance, and then that would be a lesson on appropriately giving attribution and Creative Commons exposure between their work and the work of other artists. So you can adapt the project to fit their own needs and give them choice. And then this is another personal reflection that I just found it was a lot more comfortable for me working on one-on-one individual consultation with students rather than the whole group instruction. I valued both experiences. I think this comes from the personal experience of being a speaking, arguing, and writing mentor at Mount Holyoke, which is my college. So I'm used to that one-on-one work, peer work with students. However, when I'm in a full group instructional experience, I want to be thinking more about what strategies of personalized learning can I incorporate in a larger group context. So, for example, if some students are catching on to the technology fast, other students need more help of a better way for me to communicate what I'm trying to communicate because my teaching style doesn't fit their learning style. How can I include that all into a group where there are different types of learners, which is true in any classroom? I hope to go to grad school in some educational program with EdTech, so I'd hope to learn more about strategies around that. That's a personal area that I want to work on. I'm going to discuss what did I learn. Obviously, revisiting the frame I had for this internship, the use of educational technology can be strategically used to build an environment of digital literacy, inclusive learning, and transferable media tech skills. It allows students to use different, for example, medias, and when you include different medias, you tailor to more learning styles. In terms of the platforms and skills, I learned, obviously, H5P interactive video, as I discussed, Timeline.js, thinking about Google applications for digital citizenship learning outcomes, LibGuides, basic curriculum design experience, and then applying that into classroom experience, which I was very fortunate to have. Thinking about the methodology of my projects, I know that this is not a hard and fast rule, but just reflecting on the two projects I had, I was thinking, how did we get from the idea of the project to the actual product of the project? And I came up with the steps after observing and thinking about the methodology. Usually we recognize the learning outcomes first, identify and research the appropriate tool or platform use, strategize the implementation, the adoption, and of course the evaluation of the project. Again, this is not a hard and fast methodology. This is just what I observed and I took notes on, looking back now and thinking, oh, these were the processes that I went through, and I can use this process that I've created for future projects. And then considering collaborative and individual contexts, I want to give just a brief anecdote that originally before the H5P project, I was thinking of using Credo Instruct, my supervisor and I, for using that in building a project out of that, because that was something that the Hatch Learning Commons was looking into and further exploring as a tool. However, Credo Instruct is more on information literacy. I wanted to work on digital literacy. So instead, we repivoted, made a plan to repivot that project and actually find a willing professor who was willing to work with my internship outcomes in this case one of them being strategizing digital literacy into curriculum, who already had a need, Professor Rivera Colon, as I said, and then collaborating with her. So we say, hey, here's a new tool, in this case H5P, that you can use to support students in their learning. And we were able to do that by connecting and collaborating cross-departmentally. And I realized the importance of that. You must be doing that. So this internship allowed me to collaborate and have conversations with a variety of faculty on online strategy and the actual learning science of EdTech. So I worked obviously in the DRAR department, Division of Research and Academic Resources. I worked with academic support services. That was through the ALLI program. The School of Liberal Studies I had conversations with. And then also I was able to have professional connections, which Chris Gaudreau had introduced to me to further think about postgrad opportunities and just other educators' teaching philosophies, which was so valuable for me. We often think of an internship in terms of the concrete projects that you worked on, but really the internship is that, but it's also the connections you make, it's the conversations you have, and how that's all influencing your thinking and shaping you for your future actions in the work that you do. And then also thinking about the bridge between undergrad and postgrad plans. So, as you might know, I created my own major at Mount Holyoke in critical studies and media arts, which was designed to produce an interdisciplinary art performance study, for instance, the synthesis of using sound, moving image, choreography, nonlinear, creative structures, digital narrative, take that all together. And after being abroad this past semester in the spring of 2019 in Prague, I was studying in a Center for Audiovisual Studies within FAMU, their film school in Prague. I had realized I didn't want to be a studio artist, in short, as my actual career, but I still like designing media-based experiences for people and thinking about nonlinear structures and audience experience. So now this internship has allowed me to see that I can still tailor to an audience, in this case, an educational institution as a landscape for that work, where the audience becomes a user and the user is a student. And so now I plan on applying to graduate programs in the EdTech field. So if this internship was going to further continue, what are some projects I'd want to propose myself working on beyond this summer experience? Well, I was thinking it would be a cool idea to propose an educational technology microgrant to support students that engage their learning in the intersection of technology and education. So for example, let's say a student has an independent study with a professor and they want to use a platform, but BayPath doesn't have the subscription to it, they could apply for such a microgrant. That's just an example. Of course, if I was going to draft this microgrant and what it might look like, these are things I'd want to research if I was going to design it. One would be what BayPath University student funding opportunities, if any, already exist that this grant could branch from, what the criteria for the projects would be. For example, would students need an advisor to oversee the project? How their projects might contribute to the university community. They would encourage students to address the needs within their campus and even beyond. And then, of course, the project evidence, what would that have to be? The criteria for that. And maybe, of course, this opportunity would align them to also go after a digital badge. That's the first project that I'm just thinking about I might work on if I was going to continue my experience here. The second project that I want to mention is thinking about the usage of the iPad. This is a less concrete project that I would want to be part of, but the point is that the use of the iPad represents a huge investment on the part of the university because all incoming students and faculty, as I mentioned, get an iPad as part of their learning at BayPath to support their learning. So that was originally part of a Title III grant with the intention of supporting more collaboration between students and faculty. In the initial initiative, faculty were trained to use different applications and engage students. In one of the division meetings that we had, Bob Kelly, who is also an instructional designer, at BayPath had mentioned that sometimes faculty don't include enough assignments or any assignments that require the iPad. So why are we even having students use this as a device? Would, for example, a Chromebook be better? I was thinking about my experience with the ALLI students and realizing that sometimes when they were working on their timelines, it was easier for them to go to a computer and click and drag rather than press and swipe on the iPad. That's just thinking about the iPad through an interface level. There are many different angles that I'd want to investigate, as the investment of the iPad and whether it's worth the investment, which is a conversation that the drawer department is thinking about currently. I'm also thinking about, well, let's say a student comes to college and they don't have a laptop. Well, if they're given an iPad, if everyone is given an iPad, it kind of levels out the learning device opportunity so that they all have access to at least this a same device. So there are pros and cons. This is a big conversation going on that I'd want to be part of. If the iPad was going to be continued to be given and used as an educational tool, how might BayPath leverage it, and what kind of projects might faculty create for students, and what is the purpose of doing it on, for instance, an iPad? I'm going to discuss how this internship experience influences my thinking going forward. As I mentioned, the H5P interactive video maker allowed me to play with basic interactive and adaptive quiz features. So the internship, as I said, is more than concrete projects I worked on. It also is about conversations, and I was able to connect with Jeremy Anderson, the Deputy Chief Administrator of Academic Technology at the American Women's College Talk, and the traditional courses on the adaptive learning courses that exist already in these two divisions schools. So here's a lesson from a math course that uses adaptive technology. I know you might not be able to read the text. That's okay. That's not the point. But just to explain how an adaptive technology might be used in a course, for example, let's say a student's had a question, they get the question wrong. The technology will direct them to a subsequent question based on how the student performed on the last question. So it's adaptive and personalized to the student's performance and of the knowledge that they're going through. If they get it right, it might direct them down a different path. So the technology is understanding how you're performing and adapting in a personalized way to you. This is a basic structure. Here's another structure. Again, it's okay if you can't read the whole thing. That shows the how the branching system infrastructure of adaptive technology could be more complex. It can get even more complex than this. You could have multiple choice questions. For example, a system might realize you're getting more questions, answering more questions right when they're presented as videos rather than text questions, so we're going to give you more videos in your future questions. It can get complex. This is just an example of a branching structure. So what I was really interested in was this branching structure, and I'm connecting it to my senior thesis that I'm going to be pursuing my senior year. I received a Mount Holyoke Arts and Technology grant to purchase a subscription to StorySpace, which is a software platform made for creating hypernarratives. Think of a tree-like structure with branches in multiple directions, as you've seen. So a brief explanation of what StorySpace is. Hypernarrative is a digital text, which is a kind of hypertext, which is a kind of hypermedia. So, for example, a hypermedia is basically a non-linear medium presenting information, which might include the multimedia of graphics, visuals, text, audio elements. Think of a website, for example, where you click on something, it takes you to another page, it takes you to another thing. Everyone has their own navigation experience through it. It's non-linear. A hypertext is a text embedded with hyperlinks. So, for example, think of Wikipedia. That obviously is super hyperlinked. And then a hypernarrative is a digital text in which readers have the agency over selecting their own plot trajectories through a narrative. They allow the possibility for multiple possible narratives instead of a singular linear plot sequence. So, for example, let's say you're here in this page of the story. The story might have a hyperlink where you could go here or here. Think of a computer game where you're in different rooms, where you have different rooms, and you can choose to go in X room or Y room. Sometimes the rooms are blocked because you need to have certain access. For example, let's say you're solving a murder mystery, you have to go to one room to find a key in order to go back to an X room to unlock it. But the trajectory of which rooms you want to take could be in any order you want. That's an example. That's what a digital narrative is. It uses the concepts of gamification. So I'm going to be working with StorySpace for my senior thesis, which is a hyper-narrative platform. I created, this is a design of a branching tree structure that I had created using StorySpace. It's okay if you can't really see the words. These brown rectangles are called tiles, and think of them as video game rules. If we were applying the video game metaphor, you can go to these different rooms based on the links and pathways that I have created here through the dotted lines. Now, the thing is, I've included guard fields here. Guard fields you can see by the closed blue squares in the case of StorySpace. They look like this. And so what it does, guard fields, is if you're at this room, say, and you want to go to that room, you can't because, look, there's a guard field here. But maybe it requires you to go to this room first, and you unlock something there, then you can go into that room. So the key is that connecting it to adaptive learning technology, hypernarrative and adaptive learning technology, is that you do have choice, but to a certain extent there are constraints, which I was really interested in. I'm just comparing the two infrastructures, and I'm just really interested in how they might relate for educational purposes. So adaptive learning technology and StorySpace 3 hypernarrative in this case, I'm just connecting. They both use a branching structure. You both have to obviously pass through topics and meet certain requirements. And they have guard fields and restraints that help you direct to the outcome that you're going for, whether it's a learning outcome of learning different information or whether it's finding X, end goal in a digital narrative text, for instance. The thing with the adaptive learning technology is that it includes lots of data analytics to reveal student performance. So a teacher can see, oh, this student is not understanding these concepts, maybe I should intervene or adapt my teaching, and they're better able to personalize the learning experience for students. Hyper-narrative is a gamified digital text. So just thinking about how these both lend me to interest in nonlinear branching structures, adaptive learning processes, and gamification. So I might be thinking about, for my senior thesis, what effect does the rhizomatic narrative inform in our learning processes? So the rhizomatic being the branching kind of structure. And then how can platforms like StorySpace 3 be used as educational tools? These are questions I'm just thinking about now as I go into my senior thesis, and we'll see where that takes shape. So again, I just want to say thank you to all the people involved in my internship who collaborated with me and who I had worked on projects from and learned skills from. Chris Gaudreau, Peter Testori, Dr. Shannon Compton, Will Gaida, Peter Brunette, Aaron Bouton, Surbi Patel, and Dr. Yadulet Rivera-Colon. If you have any questions for me and you want to follow up with me about anything I mentioned in this Prezi, you can view my contact information on my page. Thanks so much for listening.